Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Powerless Podcast. In this episode, I talked to Adam Woodley, who is the vocalist and guitarist of the band Allapartus, an alternative rock, emo, pop punk band out of New York. We got in contact with each other through Allapartus's social media, where they were posting clips of the newest song and choice. Really pulled me in, hearing a band that kind of sounds like in the vein of Jimmy Eat World or bands of that nature, put out this very politically, socially charged song, all about what America is, what freedom really looks like for us here, on the reality of so many people's lived experience. So absolutely fantastic. Break that song down, break down Adam's start in music, start in activism, start in union organization, start in kind of having his beliefs and where they come from and everything in between. It was great to break all that down. This band is absolutely one that you should check out if you like any sort of music in the vein of, again, indie rock, pop punk, emo, alternative rock. There's something in there for you. So yeah, it was great to talk to Adam. Loved breaking this down. And before you listen to this podcast, make sure you go check out the song Choice, as well as the band's whole back catalog prior to the recording. Absolutely fantastic. Cannot recommend it enough. Now, before we get into the episode, make sure to follow Allapartus on all socials. That is Allapartus. That'll, of course, be in the links below. That'll, of course, them everywhere, so where you can see when they're putting out new music. Adam has said that that's something they're planning on doing very soon, as well as tour dates if it's coming near you and things of that nature. Make sure to follow the podcast on all socials at thepowerlesspod. Email me at thepowerlesspod@gmail.com if you want to come on the show, if you like what Adam and I talked about, if you want to see it at us and tell us how we're both, woke liberals or something like that. Everything in between is more than welcome. So email me there. I love to have people on that are musicians, that are activists, that are union organizers, that are authors. So if you hear this and you're interested in coming on, I love to meet new bands, new activists, and new people in general, and have a conversation with them. All right, I'll leave this intro relatively short. Here is the episode with Adam Woodley of Allapartus out of New York on the Powerless Podcast. Thanks so much.
That happened to me this week. Well, it was my birthday yesterday. I turned the ripe old age of 33. So, like for people that grew up in a religious household like I did, it's the year Jesus got crucified. So there's something to say for that, I guess. I don't know, but I don't know. It's been pretty good. I've had a pretty good week with my students as a teacher and stuff like that in my day job. It's been overall like not a bad week. What about yourself?
It's been pretty good. What's something that's been really good this week? I went to the New York Botanical Garden for the first time in the Bronx. And it was one of those things where it's like, hey, on one hand, it's just a bunch of plants. And then on the other hand, it's like just taking into account, it's like, oh, this might be the only time in human history I would have access to this much flora and fauna within like a 5-minute walking distance. And so getting to appreciate the miracle of the time that I live in was pretty lit. So I'm a big fan of that. Brandon, I didn't know that you were a teacher. What do you teach?
Special education. So I teach life skills classroom for high schoolers.
God bless. That's maybe one of the most important jobs in the country right now, and I really appreciate you doing that work. One of my good friends here in the city is a special ed teacher, and that shit ain't easy.
No, it's not, but it's very rewarding. I always am like cognizant of not sounding like, I agree with all the, left-wing progressive socialist viewpoints on education, that we need to fund it better, that teachers should be paid more, and all that good stuff. And I always just am very cognizant of like not sounding like I'm like, oh, my life is so horrible, that I get to like work with these fantastic children and find creative ways for them to like learn and all this kind of stuff. So in a lot of ways, like I think the material conditions could be a lot better, but the job is great. You get what I'm saying?
Yes.
So, but of course, like, and we'll get into some politics here because, of course, the lyrics you've been writing, the things you share online, and I'm already getting going here. I'm here with Adam from. I meant to ask this before I hit record, but I can sound like an idiot when I record. The band name is how it looks spelled out as Allapartus, right? Is that how you say it?
So Allapartus is like, it's the word only exists in one place in the world. So it's Allapartus, it's Allapartus. It's how you want to pronounce it. So however way you want to pronounce it is the correct way. So that
all
being
right,
said,
I love that.
Like honestly, go off, King.
Yeah, but like I think I'm very fortunate that like I've got a lot of friends that work jobs that definitely get paid a lot better and have better benefits and all those things, but like their job is like soul sucking, right? And for the most part, mine isn't. There's things about it that can really drive you up a wall, but like at the end of the day, I go home and feel like I like did something good at my job that day, right? And like that's a really really great feeling. Again, it'd be great if it paid the bills a little easier. What are you gonna do? That'll happen in the revolution. No, I'm happy to talk to you today, Adam. I found your music, your project, Allapartus from socials, and obviously really got connected into the music from I double checked this morning the newest song you've put out, which was put out in February, Choice, that went into your catalog. Loved the music. You've got a lot of songs that are very like just great alternative rock, pop punk elements, indie rock, emo rock. I think alternative rock is a good moniker for your band. I'm not saying this in a cliche way, but typical songs with like some songs that are the internal struggles and all those things that you've put out there, but then you've got Choice and other ones too that are, I think, very poignant, especially for the genre, which is sorely needed in my view. I think for me, we're gonna get into some things here. I'm jumping all around at the beginning, but for me, what I like to see is genres and kind of spaces of music that more often than not are very what's the word, self-indulgent as far as the lyrical content goes. Emo rock, pop punk, it can be a lot about relationships, it can be a lot about personal struggles, it can be storytelling. Some of the best storytellers in the scene are like the Wonder Years and things like that as well, right? But it was cool to see a band up and coming like yourselves that put out the song Choice, that I was like floored at how, first and foremost, the song's good, which it needs to be good to get people's attention. If you write cool, if you thought-provoking lyrics but the song isn't good, who gives a fuck, right? Like, and so the song's good first and foremost, and then hearing the lyrics and hearing you kind of like pour into like this kind of social commentary in it was very cool, and something I see. I've had a few bands in this vein on, and actually one from New York City as well, that are sort of like Taking Back Sunday meets radicalism, right? But I loved that I found this band through social media. So happy to have you on today. I after all of my like leading up there and talking way too much, I asked before we started recording, but how are you doing today? How has the reception been overall for this track? 'Cause it seems like from socials there's been a bit more of a reaction for you than maybe in the past. Some very positive and very cool and seeing a lot of positive comments, and some, as we can expect from online discourse, being completely repulsive. So all in all, like, how's that all been, and how are you doing?
It's been incredible, and I'm doing really well. I'm so excited to be here and be chatting with you, just because. Yeah, dude. I mean, I saw you like initially, comment on one of my videos, and I saw your stuff and I was like, oh, cool. A dude talking to bands about like, some, progressive politics, which is, man, you see people kind of talking again, like you're saying, in a lot of these genres, and it's a lot of extremely surface level kind of stuff. And I don't know. I like this music. I'm also interested in the world becoming a better place. I don't see why I need to have one or the other. So I was interested in melding those two things, which is what Choice is. But again, to answer that question, though, it's been amazing. It's been so good. I've been putting out music for a long time. This is the most successful song I've ever put out. But yeah, I mean, I think it's been 3 months since it came out. And I think within the next 2 weeks, it's going to exceed our most streamed song ever, which we put out 2 years ago. So it's definitely, I think, resonating with people. But yeah, no, I mean, the response has been great. Some of it's been really funny. Some of it's been extremely vindicating. Some of it has been pretty disgusting and terrifying. But yeah, it's funny that we set this up. Like literally yesterday, for the first time ever, I don't know if you saw it, but it's like I got my first video ever that went up to like 100,000 views on TikTok. Before this, I think my most viewed video had been like, maybe 5,000 views or whatever. And it was the most, in my mind, banal kind of milquetoast statement of like, hey, I think it's kind of crazy that we're disappearing, like, residents who are legal in the United States. And people are just like, it was wild. There was just a lot of reactions to it. 95% of it enormously positive, enormously aligned with the message, enormously aligned with the concept of the music that I've been kind of talking about. And then 5% just chilling the absolute most just the most dumb things, but also just the most deeply hateful things. And that does suck. But I did have a moment today where I talked to my friend at work where I was just like, yeah, man, all this stuff is happening. And he kind of looked at me and was just like, Adam, what did you expect the reaction to be like after you put out Choice?
Right.
Like, did you think that everyone was just going to agree with you and everyone's going to be like, hey, it would be really great if we had social progress? And I was like, yeah, that's kind of fucking stupid that I didn't really think about that.
It's a good reality check, I think, for anybody, whether you're doing the music like you're doing, or I do this show like I'm doing, or you're kind of like crossing these two things of art and politics, where like, I think people that don't do that, there's this different sort of, I hate using this word, but sort of like hustle on social media or anything, where it's just trying to get the right bite, right? It's trying to get the right, like the clip with the right, like sort of cinema, amateur cinematography. Everybody has to be like their own videographer now to be in a band, which is awful. But, like when you do social commentary or political commentary within art or within the kind of like these, quote unquote, apolitical spaces, it can kind of garner a bigger reaction because we know social media blows up the best when people are angry about something. Like I always know, like when I posted a video that does well, like I post them on YouTube, like even like the shorts stuff, and I always know it's doing well when I just see tons of comments that are like borderline just like calls for violence against me. That's when I know, like I was like, oh, I had a nerve, that's good. Like that's the thing, is like you have to, like, I'm sure you've kind of already figured this out pretty quick with the release of the song, but like for me, I've had to kind of internalize, like, if it's getting a reaction and I'm talking about something serious, that's a good thing. If it means that like there's all these right-wing freaks and trying to like figure out who I am, or like going through your comments and saying the most personal, insulting things, it's just because they don't have a real critique to what you're saying, right? When they start doing the like ad hominems, they start like coming after something even more juvenile, like your appearance, or they say, things like that. You're like, oh, that's because I'm right. Like, that's good. You know what I mean? Like, it's a very quick way to realize, like, I either need a spine or I need to be willing to just like seethe on my phone or on my computer at all times, because like, people do feel about these things, whether or not they agree with you and I, or they completely disagree and they're into like this sort of really reactionary bullshit. The fact that you can garner that reaction means you're speaking to something that is affecting people's day-to-day lives, right? Like, I don't know, it's a weird thing to kind of like try to accept when you share these things, like the song you've done, or like, you cover the topics that you do with Choice that you then like have posted these videos about. It's like the fact that you're getting that reaction means that you're hitting a nerve, which means you're onto something. You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of the positive spin on it, I guess,
I think that getting a reaction and it speaking to people is like 100% true and is 100% the case. But also, frankly, it's like a lot of the stuff like that's like kind of mean or hateful, it's also deeply unserious. And the reality is most of it is like, it's just people who truly have like no real sense of what they're saying. Because any human being, if they really understood the gravity of what they were saying, as much as these people are saying hateful stuff, this might be naive of me, but I do really believe this, that if, there's this person in my comments who's talking about, I don't have to worry about ICE and I don't have to worry about all this stuff because, I'm a white person without a criminal record, so I have nothing to be afraid of. And I was like, I think if you went to my hometown, which is an immigrant community, and you saw a bunch of people with masks take, a mother away from her child, and all of her kids were crying in front of her, screaming, for them to not take their mother and not knowing where she's going to be or if they'll ever see her again. I don't think any person would ever see that and not feel something. So the one thing I have to remind myself, and this comes very deeply also because, I'm a labor organizer. That's like my background for the last 3 years, is that the reality is like when people are really hateful, it almost always comes from ignorance. And sometimes that's a deep hole and sometimes you can't get to those people. But I do like to remind myself that sometimes the most important thing that you can say to someone is try to connect to them on a level that like, I'm not actually fighting you. And the reality is every one of those people, it's like, I don't hate them. And ultimately they're just working people who've been screwed over by the same system that screwed me over. And the reality is they think that I am trying to attack them in their lives. The reality is I want to protect them in their liberty. I want to protect their family. And I think that everyone in my community and the people that I came up with feel the same way. So I just try to like remind myself that like maybe the best thing I can do is just keep on putting this top of mind. So I don't typically argue with these people. I don't get into Facebook battles. I did plenty of that, back when I was in high school, and realized how little it does. The reality is like all the actual change comes from talking person to person, one-on-one in real life, like actually in the world. And until you're doing that, I don't think you're really enacting any change, which is also sucks because you see a lot of people who have, maybe really progressive politics. And that ends up being the majority of their like, so-called activism is arguing with people online. And I could tell you, it's just not doing as much as you think it is. But the most important thing is that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Is that like this stuff is touching a nerve. And the fact that people are getting so angry and have such a powerful reaction, either number one, because they're like, this is messed up. The fact that we are disappearing and kidnapping people is wrong. Wonderful. I'm so glad that so many people align with that. But number two, the people who react with such strong hate and anger, my theory is, I think a lot of these people know that it's wrong. I think a lot of people really do see it. And where that hate comes from is not from like pure evil malice as if they were an evil person, but that someone is pressing on a nerve of something that they realize that maybe they are actually very deeply ashamed of. And I think it's important to press on that nerve. So again, I don't do these huge arguments, but just posting a little post like, hey, if there's no due process for a certain class of people, all they have to do is put you in that group. And then there's, no reason why they can't disappear you or kidnap your family. And that's a bad thing. Yeah, I'm just going to keep on posting that stuff. Like, yeah, no amount of hate's going to stop me from doing that.
Right. And yeah, you bring up a good point that I think is a tough thing for a lot of progressive people, especially people that like have prominent public platforms that might do sort of the debate culture stuff or the online punditry or whatever. And like, here I am doing a podcast. I kind of do that too, right? But like where debate and like politics for consumption or politics for spectacle is the same as material movement. Right. And like you talked about, you're a labor organizer. I'm not like what I would call a labor organizer, but I've helped within my own work community or like helped other people kind of like look at ways that they can, whether it's through formal organizing or just applying pressure informally if they don't have their own union, of like pushing for a pay raise, during COVID for, non-certified education workers was something I personally worked with, or like, you as a labor organizer, I'm sure you've kind of experienced this too, where like, you go to the material conditions, you go to the in-person, in real life scenarios, and you find yourself working with people that you do not have a lot of views the same whatsoever, right? Like you might be working with somebody that is a vehement Trump supporter in a labor movement that is pro-union, that is like pro pushing very good policies for their coworkers within their work environment. And I think when you do things like that, it doesn't mean that you don't feel the vitriol when somebody says some despicable stuff about what's been going on, as you're alluding to, with like black bagging, whether it's, people in the Latino community, Palestinians, pro-Palestinian organizers, whatever the case may be. It is interesting when you like are on the ground working with these people that you can, when you're working with someone that has similar material conditions as you can actually find things to work on within a lot of different scenarios that does like legitimately bring things to a more progressive place, whether or not those people realize it or not. You know what I mean? It's like a much more complicated world.
I just, one thing it makes me want to scream just looking at the news, but even just looking at social media, even looking at people who are friends and people that I love, is that how much of so-called politics actually supersedes people's so-called politics. If a Trump supporter comes up to me at work and has like, really just like completely opposite polar end of the spectrum from me, but they say, hey, I think all people who work 40 hours deserve a life of dignity where they're able to, get paid enough to afford housing, afford groceries, afford to save, and eventually pay for a mortgage. If they align with me on that, that's the start. I'm not going to end that relationship because there's some facets of their politics that I disagree with. That's the most important thing. In my opinion, it comes before really everything. The reason why we have such absolute dog shit politics in the world right now is because people are exhausted. People are just barely surviving. And that's almost kind of a joke to say living in the United States, that we're barely surviving. with fucking what's happening in Palestine, it's a joke to say that we're barely surviving. We're living maybe in the greatest lap of luxury in all of history. But the reality is most of the people I know are too exhausted at the end of the day and at the end of the week, whether they're public school teachers, whether or not they're nurses, whether they're firefighters, whether or not, they're just like cashiers. I'm just a cashier. I'm not like anything special, but I do spend, 8 to 10 hours on my feet every day. And when I come home at the end of the day, I don't want to read, about politics. I don't want to, look up candidates. Like, I want to watch Mad Men for the 8th time. Like, yeah. Bro, I just want to be chilling. I want to play Destiny 2 for a couple hours, even though it's like the worst game ever. Like, I'm just trying to like do my thing. All right. But the reality is that like my belief and kind of my general framework for everything that I work on, and even like in music, the stuff that I think about, and I write about, is that building up working class solidarity is like the linchpin. It's like the fulcrum that we use that connects to everything else. When you talk about issues of, even like, you look up the stuff that Martin Luther King was saying before they shot him, the things that Malcolm X was saying before they shot him, the things that, all these people were talking about before they were killed was like, oh, racism is like a subcategory of a larger class structure that's actually has everyone under its heel. And it's almost like if we actually, and mind you, that's when they got killed. It wasn't when they asked for equal rights for their race. It's when they started talking about the paradox of capitalism that the FBI was like, okay, game over, lights out. But I think
now you're touching on something that's like we're not allowing. Yeah.
So it's just the idea that I think that we get to working class solidarity, and that leads to higher quality of life. I think that leads to a higher possibility of people being educated and being able to combat climate change, being able to deal with racial inequality, with transphobia, homophobia, sexism, misogyny, all of this stuff. If you give people the chance to live beyond just surviving, that's the key to everything else. And ultimately creating the system where, it's not just us like, selecting these people who operate on our behalf, but we become a part of the process, an actual active part of the process. I talk all the time, and me and like, my union, like mentors, we talk about is that like, the revolution isn't going to be a Molotov cocktail and a storming, a government building. The revolution, any actual real societal change is going to be going to a ton of really boring meetings that you don't want to go to, sitting through them and taking notes and being the note taker and being the facilitator, preparing the agenda, setting up next step items for the next meeting. That's the reality of what it is. It's boring. It's not sexy, but it's the most important work that you'll ever do. Anyway, like, again, we went on a very large tangent, but like the working class thing, as far as like, what's the point that we get to that leads to everything else? It's about finding common ground with people that can just, I truly believe that this is 9% of the United States population believes if you work 40 hours a week, you deserve to have housing, food, access to healthcare, and be able to eventually buy a home and have children. I just don't believe that there's that many people who think like, no, I don't want people to have that. Everyone in the United States can respect like a work ethic. And so I don't know. I think that so many of the divisions are so manufactured and frankly are so bullshit. And so I try not to get too distracted, even though a lot of it is really important and a lot of the distractions are really tempting. But it's like the working class stuff. It's making working class solidarity. It's making sure that the fucking billionaires don't make more tax cuts to steal money from us to extract for their own funds. But yeah, the working class stuff. That's the gambit. That's the most important thing. That's top tier.
Well, and I promise we'll get into the band and your music stuff here as well.
One day.
But I do think like, everything you're saying is correct, and I agree with all of it. And I think a lot of people, when people bring up like this sort of working class solidarity, very like labor specific or class conscious specific struggles, a lot of well-meaning liberal people or a lot of well-meaning marginalized community members and things of that nature will point out what there's, things that you talk about in choice, like Roe v. Wade or trans rights or over policing and black and brown communities and all these different things that don't come off to a lot of people, I think, as the working class sort of like material conditions aspect of politics, but they actually are, right? Like, I guess like this would kind of go into what I was initially going, what was some of the notes that I had and what I wanted to talk to you about is like when you've kind of developed this political ideology, when you've kind of developed this idea, like being very active in a union or being a labor organizer or kind of developing politics outside of the Democrat Republican sphere that is so embedded in the United States from media, from pundits, from everything in between. Where did that kind of come from for you as a person? Where did kind of like those dots connect for you that, I mean, I ask this question sometimes, and obviously not everybody has like a singular moment, right? Like, but like, what were some things, or what kind of brought you to this like post-electoral bullshit framework for how you view politics and organizing at large?
Growing up in a church.
Yeah.
So my mother's is a minister. My mom's an Episcopalian minister.
I was initially going to become a pastor myself out of high school. So this is interesting to me.
I had two like really huge dichotomies growing up of some real fire and brimstone stuff coming from another part of my family. And then my mother, who was active during the AIDS epidemic in New York City in the 80s. My mom, who was a part of like third wave, the feminist movement. My mom, who was a part of like nuclear disarmament, like my mom who worked in battered women's shelters. Like my mom was a priest and I went to, church every Sunday watching her preach. But it's like my mom was still to this day is like my greatest role model. Like she's the reason, and she's kind of the roadmap that has led me to everything in my life. And one of the most important things is just like stuff needs to be actionable. And I think my mom is like really one of the greatest examples of, Christianity gets a really bad rap in this country. And with good reason. I think some of maybe the absolute most destructive people in this country and maybe in history have been Christians. And it's because of how disconnected they become. And the reality is it's not Christian doctrine. It's just white nationalism.
It's a social movement.
It's a social movement. It has nothing to do with religion. You listen to these people talk and it has nothing to do with the theology of it. But yeah, man, I went to church and my mom talked about Jesus flipping tables in the temple. And that spoke to me. But no, it's just like my mom has this concept that, there's a couple concepts that really stuck with me. But number one was the concept of justice and the concept of fairness. My mom it was so important to her that inclusion was so important to us growing up. And my mom like led by example in such a powerful way. And one thing that she always said, which I think about every single day, is she said like, freedom, like real freedom, to be able to be free is to love. And the more you can love, the more free you will become. And it's funny because that's almost like, Choice is kind of a sarcastic song. That's the non-sarcastic version. It's like freedom is all these things. It's not actually free. It's not actually good. It's actually really bad. The truth, though, of freedom is that to love others is to be free. But my mom just did a lot of stuff. And she just like focused on feeding people and taking care of people who were marginalized, taking care of people who'd had their backs turned from society. We moved to this church, which we moved to when I was 8 years old. I spent pretty much my whole life, until I was 18 and went to college there. And there was a home down the street that was a home for adults. It was a group home that folks who had schizophrenia, autism, bipolar disorder, Down syndrome. And a representative came to her and said like, hey, would it be all right if, maybe some of our residents came to church, at your church? And my mom was like, oh my God, like, of course, like, is it like, why wouldn't you just come? And I said, oh, well, we've had them at some of the other churches locally, but, after a few services, they always ask us, to not bring them anymore. And my mom was just like, are you kidding me? And they became a fixture of our community. Is that I grew up around folks who were schizophrenic and were autistic, and they were a part of our services and they were a part of our community. And on top of like having folks like that who were living in group homes, we also had, folks who were gay, folks who were trans, we had people from all walks of life who were coming here. And my mom just really, really walked the walk. And, when I went off to college, she gave me a big, box of books. And she gave me my first Noam Chomsky book about post 9/11 American interventionism. And I read it and I was just like, oh my God. I went back to my mom. I was like, Mom, is this like, do you believe all this? And she's like, oh yeah, like absolutely. And I guess like I'd never really focused very deeply on what she was saying, but I realized that it all totally lined up. And that, man, I don't know, man. It turns out Jesus is a lot cooler than his fandom, I guess. Even though it's not necessarily my life and my path, but it's something that I think anyone can pull a lot from him, even if they have no interest in the religion. And ultimately the idea of, compassion and love and empathy is the most important thing. And ultimately, people who are at the bottom of the ladder have everything to gain from sticking together. And that's what I pulled from it. So back to your initial question of like, where did this come from? It came from my mom. My mom was just an amazing person who is really like said, like she wanted to like walk the path of Jesus, except unlike all these other like just lunatics, she actually did it. And she's like my greatest role model.
Fun, and that is absolutely fantastic to hear. I love hearing, because as someone that I get, like I said, I grew up in the church. I was like very immersed in it. At one point was like in this organization that had you like every summer every year as children, we like memorize parts of the Bible and like all, like a lot of stuff going out of here that's still there, even though I probably haven't picked it up in a solid like over a decade. Right. And for me, it was like a very antagonistic thing of my worldview once I got out on my own, and was very much one of those new age atheists that was like, the problem is religion, full stop. Anybody, like that kind of thing, like that very like, who's that guy, Richard Dawkins, or like those kinds of people. And then you come to realize it's like, no, it's the fucking movement that is like the paramount of this in this country specifically, above everywhere else, that is totally bastardizing this stuff. Because there's a lot of people that you'll speak to, or there's like, you can look at like the global South for like, like left-wing revolutions or left-wing movements that are literally built within the Catholic Church. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of connection there. And a lot of it is because, like, to quote like another like atheist left-wing pundit that like kind of pulled me out of what I grew up with, he said Jesus was the communist before communism existed. Like it's like, or like you could say anarchist or whatever you want to throw out there. But like this idea of like these stories and these things that you can read, like you can get extremely great tangible lessons from it. And that's so cool to hear that not only did your mom like more walk the walk and give the example and do a lot of the things that is like almost like looked down upon, other than some like performative measures of like working with people that other people ostracize and things of that nature. Like that's what that shit's supposed to be. You know what I mean? Like that's what that's supposed to lead to. And ultimately these things are supposed to be communal, and they're supposed to be leading people towards a better life. And a better life is not a singular individualistic endeavor. A better life is a communal endeavor, right? And that's literally in the Bible, right? So it's like, it's cool also to hear that you learned that from your mom, and also got your first Noam Chomsky book from your mom. That's not something I hear very often. That's absolutely fantastic.
Isn't it so funny that we both came from that kind of background and we're both like just rocking the IWW swag?
Yeah, there we go. I know, that's awesome. Right, but like it's because like what you can, and like I've I again not a Christian or anything like that anymore, at all. But the things that I can remember that I pull from that are things that like do inform the politics that I have now, right? Like, and so it is good to it's just like, I've spoken to other bands, or I've spoken to the band Silent Planet. I don't know if you've ever heard of them before, but like a metalcore band where the vocalist is a Christian, but like would talk about all these things that he's learned from his spiritual life that like literally informed his politics to be a left wing like person that loves humanity, right? Like it's like it's not that hard to make the through line, you know what I mean? But within this country, it feels like it would be the polar opposite,
I think that they're just not as loud about what they do, but it's like the reality is that my mom comes from, a tradition of people who like, nuns and priests who like went into the draft offices during the Vietnam War and burned draft cards and got arrested. My mom came from the tradition of like the folks who like, went down to Selma and were like beaten in the streets. Like those are the people that like my mom pulled from. I mean, the bishop in DC who like spoke to Trump during the service, I asked my mom, I was like, Mom, are you familiar with this person? She goes, oh yeah, that's Mary Beth. I've known her for like 30 years.
That's awesome.
And she didn't even bring it up. Like it wasn't even something, but again, it's like these people who are actually doing the real work, but they don't go on a press tour after they do it.
Right. They're not writing their third book that was ghost written by somebody else, so they can have their their mega church or whatever it is. Right. Yeah. But no, that's just like phenomenally interesting and also really, really cool to hear. So I really appreciate you going into that. On the other side of things, before we kind of break down your songs, which we've almost sort of done with choice, but we'll still get into the nitty gritty of it and where that came from specifically in some of your other ones as well. Where did music first become like a big thing for you? Not, just listening to your parents, like music they were putting on the radio, kind of alternative music, and where did that stem from for you to then go into writing your own?
Yeah, there was a couple like eras of, I mean, I'm sure similar to you. It's like, I grew up listening to like DC Talk and like Switchfoot, like, just like every youth group kid. And it's
that Meant to Live riff is pretty legendary.
Look, people can say whatever they want, but the early 2000s youth group music industrial complex was one of the most powerful and incredible feats of capitalism in contemporary history.
Yeah.
But no, Beautiful Letdown is still to this day a top 10 all-timer for me. It's really funny. I was mentioning earlier that when Choice came out, there were some comments that were really vindicating, some that were kind of disturbing, and then some that were kind of funny. And the amount of people who said, man, I thought this was going to be a Christian rock band, and I was so glad when it wasn't. And it's one of those things that at first got me so mad. I was like, oh my God, no, that's like not what this is. I'm like not trying to do that. And then the more upset I got, I was like, I'm just mad because it turns out like you can't hide from your influences. And the reality is that's what it was. It's just the big soaring stuff. It's also like, it was a lot of other stuff I got into, but yeah, anyway, the youth group stuff left an impression. And then when I was 13, I had a general music class in my middle school. And I just learned like guitar. I just learned like basic guitar. And like I mentioned, I come from a community that has a lot of folks who are immigrants, and I grew up with like a lot of DACA kids. And so a lot of the guitar I first was playing was like Latin guitar. And a lot of like the people around me, like that's what I was like listening to. So it's like, yeah, so it was a lot of stuff like that, but it was just learning basic stuff. But I really found, I tried piano, I tried saxophone, I tried violin. I hated all of them. But when I first found guitar and realized I could make my own stuff rather than just reading music, I became a compulsive writer. And I wrote pretty much every day for a good like decade. I went a good decade just writing and playing guitar every single day. I didn't practice. I didn't get good. I'm not like a shredder, but I got really good at writing lyrics, and I got really good at just kind of like coming up with ideas quick. And that was something that became really healthy because I was a very angry and lonely kid when I was younger. And it became a great avenue for me to kind of process a lot of that. Now as an adult, I've realized that it's, maybe the greatest gift of my life was finding music. That like all the best stuff that's happened in my life has been directly related to music in some way. But anyway, had the youth group stuff, learned how to play guitar, was into the same kind of like, I was going to like Bamboozle at the time in like Jersey at this era. Which for folks who don't know, like in the tri-state area, it was, during the early, 2000s, that was the biggest festival to go to. And that's where I saw all these like huge bands that became like big influences for me. But it was a lot of like pop punk. It was a lot of like post-hardcore stuff that went on to become like, my big like influences. And then later on going into high school and then into college, got really interested in hardcore, which is not like, it's not Allapartus. Like there's elements of it. But like, Danny, my drummer's in a hardcore, or has been in hardcore bands. Kevin, my bassist, is like in deathcore bands and writes a lot of like mathy kind of like doom metal. But I got into a lot of stuff like Touche Amore and like Let Live and a lot of like kind of like just heavier stuff. I really liked Code Orange. Like Code Orange is still a big band for me. And in like late middle school and high school, also like maybe one of the biggest bands to kind of influence me was 9 Inch Nails and Trent Reznor, which I would say is probably my favorite band of all time and some of my most influential music, which also coincidentally enough, like was also a huge kind of influence on my politics when it comes to music with the album Year Zero, which like kind of just elevated my understanding of what music could be, period. But then the other things, again, aren't just the things that I like, but the actual kind of like influences that I think people can feel in the music. The two ones that I feel like we're moving past the point that it's cringe to say it's an influence, and it's really getting to the point that it's more traditional kind of influence, is Angels and Airwaves and Tom DeLonge, which is it's just my favorite. Is Tom DeLonge a terrible singer and maybe not the best writer? Yes. Are those still some of like the greatest albums? And I have still spent every day of my life trying to do what he did in Secret Crowds off of I Empire. Like, yes. And the other big one was 30 Seconds to Mars and A Beautiful Lie and This Is War. And I vividly remember being in 7th grade and seeing the From Yesterday music video and it rewiring my brain for the rest of my life. So those ones were really big. And then like Amberlin and The Dangerous Summer, which just got me into like delay guitar and stuff like that.
Yeah. The Dangerous Summer got like their most iconic riff is I used to listen to them a ton. It's been a few years, but I'm going to look it up here. What was the song?
You're thinking about the Permanent Rain.
Permanent Rain, yeah. That intro riff is like what got me to like get a DD6, I think, for the first time.
Oh yeah.
And Berlin, very similar vibe as well. But no, I mean, like from what's interesting about because they're doing this and like there's a lot of things you could say about Jared Leto. Obviously, no one condones what a psychopath that guy is. But like the fact that From Yesterday, I just learned this the other day because they're doing like a 25-year or 20-year, I think, 20-year like revisit of the album. And From Yesterday was the first music video ever filmed by an American band in communist China.
Yes.
Ever.
Yes.
And they did it in the Forbidden City. Like,
yes.
I'm sorry, that's fucking cool. Like,
dude,
that's
they
really
went so hard.
Cool.
They went so hard it hurts. And like literally, like the music video that we did for Choice, the video was directed by my best friend Tom, who was the original bassist for Allapartus, and we lived together for 10 years. He's my closest collaborator through all of this. But he felt the same way about like 30 Seconds to Mars when we first met, and he's the one who got me into The Dangerous Summer. But we literally used video references from Yesterday for our video. Not like we were trying to copy it, but our big thing for us was like, what if instead of making a quick, digestible, kind of disposable video, what if we actually put like real money into this and like actually got a crew of all of the people we know and like made something more higher production? That being said, people are probably looking at this video and are like, what are you talking about? This is like nothing. For us, it's really high production. But anyway,
it's great. I thought it was very like real. It feels like a very real experience of these people like falling in and jump, you know, by the end of it, like all like rocky, you know, like it feels a lot bigger than a lot of other people's like first sort of like, not first, but like, you know, they're like sort of like quote unquote real music video, I guess. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think Jared Leto, like, you know, in 30 Seconds to Mars, because Jared Leto directed all those videos, like the fact that he just had this idea of like, let's be the first band to ever like record a music video in communist China, and let's have the gall, like the hubris to ask to be in the Forbidden City to do it is insane. And it just goes to show that sometimes it's just a little bit of determination and a little bit of just kind of being just egregious, but it's great. Anyway, so that was a huge influence for me. So like a lot of the big soaring stuff, which also like has a lot of influence from like U2, which my mom was raised me on U2, and like the Edge's like delay guitars. That stuff is like, yeah, it's all I'm trying to do is just make those huge, bigger than life moments and just want to have a song that feels as big as the ending of From Yesterday. And I feel like I got a little bit closer to that with Choice. And I feel like I'm excited to get closer to that in the future.
Very quickly, I can already look here. It's very quickly coming up on your other most listened to song, at least on Spotify. The song Spinning in the Driveway came out in 2023, right? And Choice came out this year. So that's a, you know, significant boost, I guess. Now that everything's about numbers, kind of speak to where this song came from, and for people that haven't heard it yet, kind of the specifics, both like instrumentally and lyrically.
So something that I've realized of kind of like trying to analyze my, like, not to be like so woo-woo, but like my artistry, is that I've realized some of my best work when it comes to writing about stuff that's political is when it comes from a place of being sarcastic. And it's the same thing with the song It's Not That Bad that we put out, is it's all kind of me speaking to a joke of like, oh, the world is ending. Everything is crumbling around us. People don't care that like everything you love is being destroyed. But hey, it's not that bad. It's not that bad. And it's like with Choice, it's like, what is freedom? Like, you know, we live in the land of the free. What is freedom? It's like, dude, a bunch of guys went to a school and murdered a bunch of children. Like, isn't it so great to live in this country where we're free to do that? Dude, we just made sure that the infant mortality and the mortality of women giving birth is going to go into the ground because women don't have access to like healthcare. Isn't that amazing? You know, I have a coworker who's like, you know, I've got a homie who's trans who needs to decide whether or not to like buy their hormones or buy groceries. You know, it's like there's all these different concepts of what freedom and choice means in the country. And largely what the song is talking about is trying to point to, number one, the paradox of it. But number two is that like these people selling this just like this lie have nothing to offer you. And the reality is that all the power, all the love, all the goodness in the world that you have to gain will be through galvanizing with the people around you in your communities, even if you have things that maybe are different between the two of you, or the, you know, 100 or 1,000 or million of you. But like what Choice was that I started writing it the night before the 2020 election. And I had dinner with a mentor of mine the night before. And I went to dinner at like 4:00 because I volunteered to be a poll worker. And I had to get up at 3 a.m. to go into the middle of Brooklyn and wait to be assigned for like 12 hours. It was a crazy experience. But the night before, I was sitting with this guy who was like a big mentor of mine. And we were talking about Bernie Sanders, and we were talking about the idea of like single payer healthcare and stuff. And something that he brought up, and he was someone who, similar to you, almost kind of like, go into seminary. He almost went to become a lawyer. And so this is a guy I don't argue with because I never win. So I stopped trying. But this is a situation where he said, like, Adam, if we have Bernie get elected, and if we do, like, have this like more progressive, more socialized policy, people won't have choices anymore. And I said, dude, like, what's the point of having one choice versus 100 choices if you can't afford any of those 100 choices? If all those do is extract wealth from you and actually not give you any material care, what's the point in having choice? It's like having all these options on the top shelf, but you can't reach them. It's nothing. It's an illusion. And it was the first time ever in a conversation that he kind of went, got him, got you. But it was something that, and like to his credit, he was like, hey, that's actually like a really good point that like, I'm going to have to kind of think about that. But that's like where it started. And I kind of like, was just ruminating on the idea of like, what is choice? And it's like, it's the freedom to be, it's free to be weak, free to be poor, free to be mad, free to be like, scared. And started it there, and then wrote more of it once I started working in a labor union, because I worked in tech companies for 7 years. I did tech sales for 7 years. And during that time, I was well paid, I was in high demand, and I was good at my job. And I realized after the last year before I left that if I kept on doing it, I was not going to make it to 60. I was not going to make it because I was not going to be able to keep on living this life. And so I decided to quit and find another job, focus more on music, and start working somewhere where I can get labor experience. So I started at this job where I was able to join a labor union. And once I started working there, I met people. And the first line of the song is literally because of this homie of mine who's trans, who has had this whole life of self-discovery, of finding community, escaping a life of, really kind of just wanting to end their life. And they finally found this like, manifestation of the self that they always wanted, and they were happier than they ever wanted. And they're just living in a system that is just like, they're just like living in poverty. And they have this job where the managers are trying to like cut pay, cut benefits, and squeeze us for every dime that we have. And they have to decide between they're buying their medications or their groceries. It's like, it's wrong. And then on the other end of it, I had other people who are just trying to start a life. They're just trying to work 40 hours a week so that way they can have a home for their children, which in New York City is pretty near impossible for a working person. And it's just like freedom is like, rationing your meds. Freedom is like homes that you can't afford. But then the last thing that like really drove the nail into the coffin for me of this song was after Roe v. Wade was overturned. And that was really what led me going to the union. Was I watched an interview with a lawyer who is one of the big lawyers who led the charge of how to overturn Roe v. Wade and work with the Supreme Court to find a way to overturn it and deem it unconstitutional. And what this guy said was, he was like holding back tears in the interview. And he was like, this has been the last 30 years of my life. This is my greatest life's work. And I feel like now, like I can kind of rest because I've done this incredible work for, to distinguish the greatness of our country and our people. And I was like, this man stole a human right from half of our population and is speaking as if it is the greatest, most virtuous act in the modern era. And I was haunted by it. And something in particular was I realized I was like, me going to a protest 4 times a year does jack shit compared to this guy. This guy has aligned his job with his politics. And in doing so, he's created this enormous change, this tectonic shift of our entire country and in reality, the world, because the precedent we set here affects the rest of the world in a huge way that people might not appreciate. But once I saw that, I realized I need to make a change in my life. And that was at a point where I was feeling deep shame about working for these corporations and not really contributing anything to society. I was just making rich people richer. And so I left, I went to work for the union, and it's a small thing. It's not huge. I'm not affecting, national legislation, but I am working in collaboration to organize working people to find ways to galvanize and collaborate and build some sort of progress for us and set precedents for other people. But those were the main things that led to that song. And then the funny last part of it is the bridge. Is that in the bridge, you have that kind of like yelling voice. That's actually a sample from the first time I ever spoke at a labor rally. And it was when I have a clip of it on the Allapartus Instagram, but it was,
I'll definitely throw that in here. I'll grab that and throw it in.
But it was, our union was asked for someone to speak, and it was the day before the vote for the Essex Crossing Trader Joe's union. And they ended up losing, which was a shame. It was almost an even split 50-50. They were really close, but they didn't make it. But I still know a lot of those folks, and they're incredible people, and the work that they did was amazing. But what I just said was that, like, you know, these people, like, who we're talking about, like, you know, they're terrified of accountability and security, and they're terrified of us living a life of dignity. And like, who are the people who are afraid of those things? Like, they're liars, like they're fascists. These are people who build a life on extracting and exploiting other people. And it's wrong. So it's like, ultimately, this idea of building working class solidarity is all about us coming together with one voice and saying, this is all a con. This idea that, like, you can only talk to your manager one-on-one, and they won't talk to you in a group of people. And they'll have a conversation, and they'll negotiate, but you can't do it as a group. And to do so would be dishonest. It's like, dude, you're a joke. You're a joke. You're pretending like any of this is normal. And the last thing I'll say about Choice is that ultimately what it's trying to do is it's using a sarcastic voice to try to frame our country and our world right now that none of this is normal. It's just so just out of whack. And when you say any of it out loud, a 10-year-old kid could look at you and go, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is all super poignant, and I do appreciate the sarcasticness of this, and also, like you said, your other, like, what I would say your other, like, most socially conscious track, It's Not That Bad, which I got a kick out of like talking about, like, you know, you'll get your things and it's not that bad, or, you know, like all these different things. It's like the world as like we left. I love the line. I don't have it up in front of me, so I'm probably bastardizing it, but of like, we left the ocean too early because it's going to pull us back in, that sort of like climate change, like doom, which is impending on us all. I think all those things are both like very punk rock of you, in a way of like putting your politics in music. That's very like no effects almost, even, or something, you know, like they did so many things like that really like pulled me into things when I was younger that I always think of. But I mean, it makes a lot of sense, right? Like sometimes the only avenue to, it's kind of like how certain class conscious comedians have always been, in some ways, the people that radicalize people the most, because they're able to talk about very serious topics in a very intelligent way. It's also very snarky and funny that makes you laugh, and then you walk away and you're like, oh shit, I just laughed about like the world burning. But like, you know, it gets you to that point. It's in a very similar vein. And I guess I don't really have too much more to say about that, other than this song covers so many different topics, like line by line, in a way that made me frustrated as a guy that writes politically charged music, but like I scream it so I can usually say about 10,000 more lines than you would have to do with a melody. But like, I'm always so mad when I see a line like here, I'm gonna look at it again here real quick, of just like the lines back together of like the opening lines of the song is, freedom is the meds we have to ration, freedom are the homes we can't afford, freedom is it's like, dude, that takes me like half a song to get to those points, and you did it in like 4 sentences. It was awesome. So kudos to you for that. The song is awesome. It's really cool that you've got those lines from you speaking at this, you know, union function or organizing function. I guess like for you, do you find with music when you're doing this, because obviously looking back at your other songs, like you've written about a lot of different things that aren't just social political commentary, do you find it's you know, easier to kind of pour these things out of you because it's what you're seeing in the world? It's a lot more of like a deeper place emotionally than maybe even some personal strifes that all are very, very, very deep within us when we, you know, have relationship issues or storytelling songs or whatever the case is. Do you find it's easier to kind of pull those things out of you lyrically when it comes to songwriting? Do you feel that you nitpick it a little more? I guess I'm kind of going on the songwriting lyrical process more here. Like, do you enjoy doing that more, or is it easier for you, or is it more of like painstaking to make sure you're getting things exactly right? I guess you get what I'm saying.
So it's so easy for me to write about like relationships and internal struggle. It's actually really hard for me to write about things that are political, and it's never come naturally to me. And like I said, like Choice took me years to finish.
Yeah, 2020.
And I mean, I listened to like Thrice and like Dustin Kensrue, who's another huge influence of mine. I'm also someone who comes from like a deeply like religious background. Again, funny enough, someone who's really into class consciousness and like ending wars. Also someone who came from like a deeply religious Christian background. He writes these lyrics, and I mean, similar to you, I read them and I cry, and I'm like, why can't I write this? Why can't I write this way? But again, like realizing that I write the best when I'm sarcastic and kind of petulant, it was kind of like a key for me, as I realized like maybe I need to not be so like, I don't know, mature about it. Maybe I can be a little bratty about it. But anyway, all the songs are about everything. And one thing that's really important, especially with this experience, because no one gave a shit about It's Not That Bad. No one cared when it came out. But one thing that's been important with Choice is that like, I'm not going to become Rage Against the Machine. I frankly don't have any interest in becoming Rage Against the Machine. And I'm never going to be like an only political band. But politics, in my mind, it's like people would read this and think like, oh, I'm like hyper militaristic in my politics, which is not untrue. But the reality is that I think everyone should be political in some regard. I think being political should be as commonplace as like knowing what you cook for dinner every night. You know, it should be as common as understanding like, you know, like how do you manage any facet of your life? Like civil duties and engaging in like, you know, having civil engagement period should be a part of everyone's life. The idea that people think that they can just opt out of it, I think is ultimately like, again, it's something that we've been sold that is extremely dangerous. The idea that like, hey, it doesn't affect you. You don't have to worry about it, because you will have to worry about it eventually. But anyway, that's all to say that like, I want to write about political stuff, but yeah, I also want to write about my relationships with other people. I want to write about my relationships with myself. And, you know, I think it's always going to be a mix of like whatever's on my mind, and truly Allapartus is going to be whatever I want to write about. Because to be honest, more than anything, it's just about what I want to do. It's about like the kind of music I want to make. It's really not about like what I think people want to hear or what I think would be the best to put out. I mean, it just happens that Choice is coming out now. I did not intend for it to come out during this time. And something that I mentioned in one of my videos is like, this isn't a response to the Trump administration. You know, I wrote this during the Biden administration. The same stuff that like I'm talking about, you know, in the song that applies now also applied then. It's not about like, you know, right versus left. It's about like up versus down. That's the whole but anyway, but back to your point though, like of kind of like the differences between the songs and like how the writing occurs is like, yeah, man, I write about a lot of different stuff, but it's like you have It's Not That Bad, which is about like climate change, which is my first. So this whole era of Allapartus came from me meeting this guy, Colin McClutchy. He is this guy who put out this record with his band In Contrast. And I saw it and I was like, oh, this is an amazing record. It's like kind of this like kind of indie emo record. And I looked at it and I went to college with him, but I never met him. And I saw that he produced the whole thing. And this was at a point that I really knew I wanted to start working on music more. And I sent him a message just on Instagram. I was reaching out to people all the time at this point. I was just desperate to work with anyone. And I said, hey, you know, this EP is really good. I think I'd be interested in working with you. Like, is that something that you'd be interested in? And he said, hey, can you have dinner tomorrow night? And I was like, done. And I sent him some songs and then we had dinner and he was like, yeah, do you want to go check out my studio? And I was like, sure. And we went and he said, all right, let's listen to your 4 songs. And we listened to them. And I showed him 3. And then the last one was It's Not That Bad. And I was like, this one I'm nervous about. It's really political. I don't think it's really like anything else I've put out right now, but I don't know if it's the right thing to do. And he listened to it and he said, that's the one we're going to work on first. That's the most important one that you sent me. And I was like, you know, what are you talking about? He's like, dude, you just need to like be honest. Like, yeah, you're being preachy in it, but who cares? Maybe that's what's needed right now. And it gave me this unbelievable confidence to kind of stop being so self-aware and so terrified of criticism. Frankly, it's like in Choice, this is reflected in Choice, where the reason why I sampled myself, like giving a speech at a rally, was because it's like, you know what? Yeah, like I am that guy. I'm not just some rich kid from the suburbs, even though I kind of am a rich kid from the suburbs, at least from a global standpoint, who doesn't do anything and just complains from his armchair. I'm actually doing work. There's actually a change that I'm trying to make in the world. And I'm using like, you know, my interest to try to affect change in my community. And so I kind of, honestly, it was kind of like huffing my chest up a little bit and being like, yeah, I am him. And what Colin did was he gave me the confidence that I needed to really speak on the stuff I was really terrified of sharing. And that's where the greatest music comes from. So what are the songs that I put out? The songs I put out were me talking about climate change and that I'm terrified that the world is going to burn. And that my favorite place in the Hudson River Valley, I'm not going to be able to show my son or my daughter. And that hurts in my soul. And I write about having a long-term relationship that almost ended and watching the entirety of it flash before my eyes and really focusing on how I contributed to its destruction, and how the things that had kind of been bred into me over a lifetime led to me not caring about someone as much as they deserved. And then in Coalesce, it's a song that's entirely about my relationship with myself and my relationship with my inner child, who I'd largely abandoned for most of my life as someone who was weak and was not deserving of care. And I look back at that self now and realize that he was just a kid. And you know what? I owe my entire life to him. He wasn't perfect, but he survived. And it turns out that's the greatest thing I could have asked for, and he delivered. And so I have all these songs that ultimately are driven by these ideas of just like where am I finding the deepest connection to self? What am I most terrified of saying, and how can I articulate it? And I kind of, with Allapartus, there's a lot of lore that no one knows about. There's a lot of stuff that I kind of dig into, but my mental framework for it is that Allapartus has 3 tenets, and it's visible in the iconography for it. The first one is exploration, or a sense of trying to achieve some kind of freedom in the world. And that's the astronaut helmet. That's Keith, the little logo. Is trying to explore yourself, explore the world. The second one is connection, which is the golden record. It's the little record that they put on the Voyager that you'll see all over our stuff. And it's the idea of trying to connect with others, or connect with ourselves, or connect to work like art. And then the last one is perspective, which is the --A logo that you'll see all over our stuff, which is the idea of how can we use art, music, or relationships to change our perspective on how we see ourselves, the world, each other. But each one of these songs is something I was terrified to talk about, but I desperately needed to, that in some way engages with one of those 3 tenets, or all 3 of them all at once.
Well, that's awesome. First of all, that you've got like all this sort of iconography and all this like detail to it that really, like, I think that helps people in like break new ground within the music in and of itself in a lot of ways. I think that's really, really cool. And another thing is, you just did a fantastic breakdown of a bunch of your songs in like a couple of minutes. So thank you for doing that on my end as well for the podcast. But no, I mean, I think it's good to your point of like to have politically conscious songs, because you know what? Rage Against the Machine is not for everybody. Heavy music is not for everybody. The hardcore community is not for everybody. And so also, inadvertently, from just you being honest with your music, you can also catch somebody off guard with what you're conveying, which I think is a really, really cool thing. Not that music is all what's the word I'm looking for within the Christian community? It's not all evangelical, right? It's not necessarily supposed to be, but it is a reflection of the world. You broke that all down beautifully. I'm not going to sit here and rant on anything you said. It was all fantastic. That was absolutely beautiful, Adam. Thanks so much for going over that. I'm not going to take a whole lot of more of your time here. I think we went into a lot of great things here. But what's going on for the band going up in the future? Do you have more releases you're looking to do? Are you looking to do more shows? Are you looking like what's kind of 2025? Other than the world burning, what's 2025 looking for the band? And then we can kind of get into the plugs as well. Make sure to kind of let people know where they can find you as well.
Well, honestly, it's like with Allapartus, I've always balanced it between a bunch of different things, like, doing activism, doing my job, my relationship, working in my community, and also just like straight up just like taking time for myself to do nothing productive at all. One of my radical teachings from being in a union is like, hey, it should be everyone's goal to work the least amount possible and enjoy their lives and spend time with their friends and family as much as they can. Crazy radical socialist doctrine there. But right now, it's kind of funny. I had a whole schedule for 2025, and choice kind of ruined it by being way more successful than I expected. So I'm trying to really kind of invest in that in the moment, which again, it's so much. The success is compounded so quickly that I'm kind of just trying to keep up and keep the boat steady. But what it's going to look like is, I just making videos and just like, putting stuff up online, trying to talk to people and have conversations and make connections. People talk trash as much, a lot about TikTok, and a lot of it is totally fair. But one thing I'll say about it is that it forces you to find a process where you can create a sustainable workflow and also experiment as much as possible and create consistent work. And I think that's maybe the two like most important things for being an artist of any sort, is developing those practices and that consistency. And as much as it can kind of be trash and be a little bit of like, not really get a lot of results, it does force me to like think about what's the stuff that I want to make, because it can be whatever you want. So I'll be making a lot more of that stuff, and then trying to play as many shows as possible, because ultimately I don't want to just be like a TikTok band. I still think live music and in-person community is the most important facet that any band can invest in. It's just trying to connect with people, meet other bands, play with cool people we respect, go to parts of the world that we've never been to, and try to get in front of as many people as possible, because, hey, call me crazy, I really like my music. I think it deserves to be heard. I want more people to hear it. So it's going to be a balance of those two things. And then right now it's planned to have a record done by the end of the year. And awesome. Thankfully, I've got my producer, Colin, who is really like the fourth member of Allapartus and really is the kind of like vanguard of our process. He's the one who really had the faith. He was the first person, I feel like, to really have any faith in these songs, to be like, this is something important and I want to help you bring this to life. And he's like become, my greatest ally and collaborator. But we've got one song that is done, that's going to come out after Choice. We have 3 songs that are nearly done, and those will be probably the releases for the rest of the year. And then we have another 5 that we're going to start developing and kind of round out towards the end of the year. So, the first little EP was about a lot of internal stuff. This whole record is going to be about a lot of external stuff. And then there will probably be a third. And that's that concept is still kind of like cooking. It's still a little bit like in the oven right now. But anyway, yeah, it's going to look like a lot of shows, a lot of music, and a lot of just trying to like create cool stuff. And frankly, it's just figuring out a way to navigate being an artist in this world that we're in right now, which frankly is terrifying. But also at the same time, it's like I try to, I mentioned at the beginning, like, being in the New York Botanical Gardens, and that it's like, hey man, this is like maybe the only time in history I could exist where I could see all these plants in one place and kind of realize the miracle of the world that we live in. At the same time, living in such a dark time, there's never been a greater point to like rise to the occasion, to like find ways to find common ground, to like love one another, to find ways to fight together. And as much as it sucks, I know that I'm up to the challenge, and I know that the people I love are up to the challenge. So facing this kind of time, learning how to be an artist and also how to be a human being, man, it's going to be exciting. I'm terrified, but I'm also very excited about it. So it should be an exciting year. And I think if people want to follow along, I think there'll be a lot of cool stuff that comes out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great outlook. You're giving a lot of hopeful messages in dire times here, which is sorely needed, I think, whenever anybody talks about politics right now. So I really appreciate that. Adam, again, thanks so much for coming on. 2 questions right at the end here. Make sure to plug where everybody can find all your stuff. Find the band, find you, find whatever you want them to find. And I always play a song at the end of every podcast. We could play Choice. That seems like the obvious choice. But you pick it. So tell people where to find the band, find what you're doing, then pick the song to play at the end of this.
Yeah. So it's Allapartus, Allapartus. I'm sure it's in the title of this episode or this video that you are watching.
It'll also be in the links below for everybody. Yes.
But you can find us everywhere. If you Google us, we're the only thing that comes up. The word doesn't exist anywhere else. Yeah, stream the songs. And the biggest thing I just want to plug is like this music video. It is truly the greatest work that I think I've ever done. It's not just something that came together as kind of like a cool, dumb thing I did like on the side. It's my best friend in the world directed it. The people who are in it are not just extras. They're my union mentors. They're public school teachers. They're childhood friends. These are the people who've been closest to me throughout my whole journey. And it feels like really like a coalescing of my entire life coming together here, which again, it's like kind of a bit to my friends that I'm very hopeful, but that's what all this is. It's just, I'm so deeply disinterested in being hopeless. And I have everything to gain from being hopeful and everything to lose for being hopeless. And that's what this music video is. And it was shot on 35mm film in my backyard in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. I feel like it's a great synopsis of what Allapartus is and where we're going. So check it out. And if you love it, amazing. Send it to your friends. Send it to your enemies. And and follow us like on TikTok, and we're putting out cool stuff. And this is something I haven't plugged like enough, but if anyone like made it this far in the episode, I made a little zine about choice. And this little zine is just like about the background of a lot of the stuff that we talked about. And I made it myself, and I printed it and cut it myself. And if anyone is interested in, likes the music and is interested in this, like literally just DM me on Instagram. I'll send this to you for free. If you like it, like I think physical media is really cool, and I'm a little lunatic like that. But check it out. So check us out on all the socials, listen to the music, watch the music video. Yeah, dude, there's hope for the future as long as we recognize that their propaganda would be useless. If their propaganda would be unnecessary if the fight was hopeless. But yeah, dude, let's throw choice on. Let's let the banger go.
I think that's the correct answer with what we talked about in this episode. So again, this is Adam from Allapartus out of New York. We're going to play the song Choice on the Powerless Podcast. Thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate your time.
Appreciate you, Brandon. It was a pleasure.